Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Tokenizecast, a podcast which is focusing on emerging technologies and especially in the space of Web3, blockchain, cryptocurrency, and tokenization. Today, we have Taylor Sherwin, who is the co-founder and CEO of TradFi to DeFi, helping communities to adopt DeFi, and he's also running his own podcasts, educating the community about these technologies and jargons. So, Taylor, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
You are very welcome. You're very welcome. No, you are. We are very excited to have such thought leaders like you on the show, Taylor. Definitely. As far as the weather check is concerned, how's the crypto weather today? How are the crypto winds blowing?
Yes. Well, the crypto winds were warming up a little bit when we got this SEC action on the grayscale situation, and Bitcoin shot up from 25,000 to 27 or something. And now it's gone right back down to 25. So I think it just cooled off a little bit again. And the reason is that, you know, uh, the SEC has decided to hold off on additional approvals for Bitcoin ETFs. And I find that to be not too surprising, unfortunately, given this current administration. And I think there's a lot of regulatory challenges in crypto that could mean that it's going to stay cold for a little while. So I was hoping crypto weather was warming up, but maybe it's a little bit cooler than I hoped.
Okay, yeah. So I think people like you and educating the community and educating everyone else on what cryptocurrency is, the benefits of that will definitely help warm the temperature, I think. So
Absolutely.
Taylor, I really wanted to ask about, okay, what does this mean to decentralized finance? But before we get there, can you, in your words, explain what is TradFi and what is DeFi, and now another term of CDFi is popping up. What's all this?
Yeah, great question. So TradFi to DeFi is sort of the name that I've adopted for our community, which is this idea of the transition between two worlds. And the two worlds I can make very simple for our audience: traditional finance, TradFi, and decentralized finance. And what we mean by this is, I used to be a financial advisor helping financial customers interact with investments. And to exist in the TradFi system, you have to go through a very complex approval process, KYC process to get to know a broker, to work with a custodian. And every single one of these words that I'm using are essentially barriers to entry. Now, for a long time, these barriers were stood up in a way to protect investors, but sometimes we find that that doesn't always work out. And really, what the key thing that makes TradFi different than DeFi is that there are these centralized intermediaries. And what we mean by this is that there are people that help you access a financial asset or some type of vehicle. Now, in order to get access to those vehicles, you need to go through a series of checkpoints. And sometimes those checkpoints can be onerous, they can be difficult, they can be lengthy, and they can also be exclusionary. They can keep people out of these vehicles who would otherwise like to have access. And so TradFi really is the legacy banking system, the legacy investment system that most people today are used to. They assume that if they want to interact with the stock market, they have to go to a broker. And they assume that if they want to get access to a high yield, they have to go to a hedge fund. Now, DeFi comes along and says, well, hey, what if we turned all of that on its head and we said, let's give access to people with an internet connection? That is your barrier to entry for DeFi. And what's exciting about that is that it allows a lot more capital formation. It allows a lot more people to get access that wouldn't have that. And I think it's the greatest tool for banking people who are unbanked currently. And so DeFi comes along and says, well, let's not use centralized intermediaries. Let's just have a protocol that gets spun up and let's let people access it if they want to.
Wow, perfect. So, what is this protocol? Should a average user is it required for him or her to understand this protocol to operate in this ecosystem?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Protocol is a word that gets thrown around a lot, but you can think of it very simply as it's simply a rule set. So for instance, you could think of the Bitcoin protocol. That is just the rules that govern the Bitcoin network. When you think of a DeFi protocol, it might be a decentralized application built on top of a public blockchain network. And so a protocol really is just rules of engagement for a particular system. Now, here's where it gets exciting and also challenging. There's a ton of different protocols, and people mean different things when they say protocols, or they use different words. And so it's very important to just sort of keep your grounding around just a handful of maybe networks that you trust that people are building applications on top of. And so similar to the internet, where everybody got access to the internet, but they needed a browser to get there, it's like that with blockchain. The blockchains are publicly available, but you need to interact with them in some way. And there's typically an application, such as a smart contract wallet built on top of it, or a lending protocol built on top of it. So when you hear the word protocol, just think to yourself, okay, that's a place where I can play around in DeFi.
I see. I see. Okay, and those apps that you are talking about are called as dApps, no decentralized apps per se. No,
Yeah,
is that fair?
dApps
Yeah.
is the shortened name of it. So DAPPS, and decentralized applications is probably the best way to think about it when you're interacting with, let's say, Compound, which is a very common dApp on top of Ethereum. You would basically be interacting with a dApp, decentralized application, and that's
Mm-hmm.
helpful for people because it's a lot like the apps on your phone, for instance. And
Mm-hmm.
so, different experience. Definitely, there's a lot of differences there that we can go into, but that's how I would think about it.
Yeah, you said protocols are like rules, right? Uh, so it gives me some peace of mind that the decentralized finance is not all like a lawless wild west. So there are rules. It's just that it is not defined or governed by a central entity, but rather a group of decentralized entities. Is that how
Yes,
to think
yes.
about it?
That is a good way to think about it. And you want to keep in mind though, what are the rules? And there's a phrase that's become popular in crypto that I kind of like, which is code, not kings. And so what's
Mhm.
meant by this is, what are the rule set? Well, it's publicly verifiable based on the code of that particular protocol. And it doesn't matter what king or centralized entity has any sort of opinion about it, the code
Mhm.
will operate in the way that it was programmed to. This means, similar to perhaps a vending machine where you put a quarter in, and if you have enough money, you get some Doritos that you've selected. The machine will always operate the same way with the same type of input. You change the input, and the rule set doesn't change, but the output might change. And that is how you should think about DeFi and protocols. It is code that ultimately determines the activity. Now, that goes into the most important question, which is who coded it? What were
Yeah.
their incentives? And
Yeah.
so you do need to understand that some of these protocols are coded in ways that are fantastic, helpful. They facilitate amazing transactions. However, you use the word Wild West, and that's a very correct similarity that unfortunately there are, in fact, protocols that are dishonest and some that want to take your funds, and there are scams out there. And so you always want to be extremely careful about the protocols you interact with, and make sure that you're not doing something that you don't completely understand.
Mhm. So, what are the systems in place to make sure that these protocols are really doing what they are saying they are doing? Is there audit in place, or how should I
Yeah.
know that this protocol is good versus bad?
Yeah, there's a great that's a great question. And ultimately there's a variety of risks you need to think through before you approach a DeFi protocol. And none of this is investment advice, but what I would encourage people is to think of the Lindy principle, which is this idea that whatever's been around long enough tends to be more likely to continue into the future. And so when I think of what I would consider to be blue chip DeFi protocols, I'm thinking of Compound, Aave, Maker. These are protocols that have been very battle tested, and if they've had challenges in the past, they've quickly patched them and fixed them up. When you are interacting with a protocol, though, you need to think through a handful of risks. No matter what protocol it is, there is always going to be an element of smart contract risk. Now, smart contract is kind of a new word that I'm introducing here, but essentially, if we go back to our vending machine analogy, a smart contract is really just a vending machine on the blockchain. And what I mean by that is it is a very simple if then statement that might become extremely complex, but ultimately it is taking inputted information and changing an output based on what's in the input. And so with a vending machine, we use the example of, you want to buy some Doritos. If you don't put in enough money, the machine will automatically tell you, hey, you need to add more money. There is no human being involved to tell you this. Well, if you go to a DeFi protocol and you want to borrow money, let's say against some collateral, you have to put in collateral. And if you want to borrow money against that collateral, you have to abide by the rules of the protocol. And so you cannot break the rules of the protocol.
I see. Yeah. So wonderful analogy there with the vending machine, Taylor,
Yes.
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
So no, we talked about TradFi and DeFi. What is the CDFi? Is that the pit stop towards the evolution of DeFi, or is that a
Yeah, when you say
compromise
C
between?
DeFi, yeah, are you talking
Yeah.
about like centralized DeFi or
Yeah.
private DeFi chains?
Yes. Yeah. So
Yeah.
which says which claims to have the best of both worlds.
Yes, yes, I'm familiar. In fact, there's a lot of projects doing very interesting things in that space.
Mhm,
I think of Avalanche that comes to mind with subnets.
mhm.
There are permissioned blockchains which are interesting that require KYC. So yes, to your point, there's kind of an in-between world. So if we have TradFi over here and we have DeFi over here, there's somewhat of a middle ground, which, like you said, centralized DeFi, which is kind of an oxymoron, right?
Misnomer. Yeah.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
perhaps it's a misnomer. Now, you
Mm,
might recall that Aave and Compound at one point, I think, tried building an institutional focused um, private ecosystem for their protocols, like Aave, I forget what theirs was called. And it was basically only for KYC'd individuals who wanted to then trade with one another. And they found that there was not a lot of liquidity that flowed there. And so there's a challenge to really bootstrap these CDFI opportunities because a lot of the liquidity enjoys being pseudonymous and enjoys just being able to interact whenever they please without having some KYC requirements on them. So when I say KYC, that's just know your customer. And so there are regulated institutions that we absolutely want to support and we want them to get comfortable with crypto. So I do think CDFI does have a place, but ultimately, you're making a sacrifice in the efficiency of your system because blockchains, although they are fantastic because they settle with finality and they're publicly viewable and they're amazing for a lot of the things that they offer, you can still get better execution with the Nasdaq, right?
mm,
And so if you're going to give up that decentralized aspect, you better be gaining something on the efficiency side. Otherwise, it's really not worth that effort. So I think this is the innate challenge between TradFi and DeFi, which is why you end up either in one camp or the other. I just don't think that if you put it in the middle, you can be that successful. We've seen projects that have tried to do this, and like I mentioned a couple of examples, it just tends to not work. Think of like the Libra Diem project as well. Kind of is this somewhat middle ground as well, which is that it was, a public blockchain, but kind of not really. And it was, the stablecoin was controlled by this conglomerate, but really not really. And it was made very skeptical because of the fact that it had all of this potential political implications. And so we see a lot of these experiments, they just don't quite work, in my view.
mm. Yeah, no, that's a great point. You see, the idea of decentralization and all of this is to solve the problems of inefficiencies and trust, right?
Yes,
So, no, if you are taking a middle ground, you better solve at least one of that, right? So, inefficiencies of time or inefficiencies of trust, at least, right?
completely.
Yeah.
I couldn't have said it better.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Sure. So, and TradFi deals with fiat currencies and real world assets. And how does the asset scenario look in the context of DeFi? Is it digital asset tokenization? All of that comes into play in
Yeah.
that area, Taylor.
Yeah, so there's a big trend that people are hearing a lot of, which is RWA, real world assets. And, I kind of have quibble with that idea because I think DeFi is real. So you kind of imply that DeFi is not real if it doesn't have real world assets in it. But I think, analogies and acronyms become popular and that's what people stick with. DeFi was kind of a new term that was created for decentralized finance, but there were other names for it when it was being created. One was open finance, which to me sounds like probably a better way to think about it, but I digress. With real world assets and tokenization and digital assets, I mean, there's probably a few different buckets of uh, use cases. There is Bitcoin, which was sort of the OG, and people like to say, well, there's nothing backing it. Well, it is backed by the laws of physics, and it is backed by the belief of its users. And the consensus among the community is that Bitcoin is one of the most important assets of digital assets. Now,
Mm,
in the wake of Bitcoin, we had a variety of altcoins and some people call them different names, but there's other projects that have come to try and solve different things. And one of those was smart contracts, which is what Ethereum brought to crypto, which was this idea of programmability. And so then that led to all of these new use cases, things like NFTs. and the real world assets that can then become tokenized. So what I'll do is I'll sort of unpack those two ideas and then maybe talk about a few examples. So when we say like a digital asset, that can mean a lot of different things. I like the term digital assets better than cryptocurrencies, though, because when you think of cryptocurrency, that's limiting your use case to a monetary use case. But as we all know, finance is only like a small percent of your life. It's an important part of your life, but I see you have books in your background. You probably enjoy art, you enjoy sailing, right? And you enjoy reading. I mean, there's a lot more to life than money, right? And so people have taken the concept of blockchain and said, well, how can we apply this to other things? And so that's where digital assets come from. And so, NFTs are very popular, non-fungible tokens, and these are most commonly used for tokenized art. And so it's funny as you go down this path, there's all these different terms that layer into one another. So with like a tokenization process, I think of tokenization as simply, hey, you have a receipt or a coupon or an IOU that is redeemable for some type of thing. Okay, now that could be all sorts of things. It could be real estate, it could be the title to your house, it could be art, it could be rights to join a club. So there's a lot of different things that can be tokenized. And the reason you might tokenize in the first place is because you're trying to capture some type of efficiency or some new way of communicating that value in an internet smart contract based context. And so I think I may have come a far away from your question, but I hope that sort of helps sort of break down how I at least think of those different concepts.
No, definitely. The one difference that I wanted to understand is how is it different from, say, a digital representation of a ticket? I mean, of course, we are dealing with digital money today. Yes, some are still dealing with cash and checks, but majority of us are dealing with digital currencies, and our concert tickets are already digital. So, how is tokenization different from digitization?
Yeah, that's a great question. So digitization is easily replicable. Okay, so you can have a JPEG on your computer and you could copy it a million times. You could also upload it to Facebook, and now there's a copy of it on Facebook's server, right? You could copy and paste it with no cost to you, virtually $0 of a cost to you, right? And that's very convenient for a lot of different reasons. But if you think about that, could I just make a $10 picture of a $10 bill on my computer and then copy it? And now do I have $20? Well, no, that's not really how that works, right? And so tokenization says, well, hey, what if we introduce the blockchain? And what does the blockchain let you do? It does not allow the double spend problem. And so people can look this up. The double spend problem, that's what Bitcoin really solved, which was this idea of how do we prevent somebody from copying something in a digital context that shouldn't be copied. And ultimately, tokenization is different from digitization for that very fundamental reason. It is a unique IOU associated with one specific asset that can only be used within the authority of the protocol. Again, using one of the other words from earlier in this conversation. And so when you think of a tokenization of a dollar with USDC, let's use Circle as a great example of tokenization. They take dollars in a bank account and then they tokenize them by putting them on the blockchain. Now, as soon as that dollar exists on the blockchain, they say, okay, this money in this bank account now is not spendable because it's now living on the blockchain. And so you could trade with that USDC, you can send it all around the world. And then eventually somebody might say, hey, okay, I've got this USDC in my wallet. I'd like to now go to Circle and redeem my USDC for actual dollars. And this is a process that Circle has done very successfully. And other stablecoins are doing it as well. But Circle in particular, they'll take your USDC and then they will go to their bank account and say, okay, cool, we're going to take this blockchain asset, we're going to burn it and essentially make it disappear. And now you are going to receive actual dollars. So that is a perfect example of how Circle avoids double spending and just printing USDC. Because if you think about it, anybody who's ever been in the driver's seat of controlling the money supply always turns it on full force and they print and print and print and print. So if you think about it, the government is not tokenizing their dollars and trying to hold back their spending. They're printing it as much as they possibly can. And so Bitcoin, blockchain systems, things like USDC, they try to kind of solve this and say, hey, look, we're only going to mint and redeem based on actual assets that back these blockchain assets.
Wow. So that's why they are stable, not volatile, right? So in the
Yes,
example of
exactly.
USDC.
Yeah, so that's
Okay.
exactly right. And when people think of stable coins, that's another term. Just think of it as it's typically a dollar-based payment
Hmm.
vehicle, and common ones are USDC. Other ones are Tether and uh, Binance USD, Gemini USD. There's a lot of different versions of it.
Hmm. So going back a little bit in your conversation, you brought some examples of titles and deeds being tokenized. So clearly, tokenization is beyond cryptocurrencies, right? So yes, the crypto wins and the crypto weather might be impacting the crypto side of it, but tokenization can still be an independent, successful entity, Taylor, because the scope of that is beyond currencies, and it is many more such assets. Is that a true statement?
Yes, in fact, I encourage people who are interested in crypto to not get caught down the money rabbit hole. It
Yeah.
can be very overwhelming. When you first hear about Bitcoin, it's almost always accompanied with stories about the Federal Reserve and why gold is an important asset and why the Federal Reserve can't be trusted. I mean, these are statements that I think are fascinating to explore. And if you're an economics nerd, I mean, go ahead. But the challenge is that we have, I don't know, 7 billion plus people in this world, and not all of them care about a stuffy economics textbook. I was a finance major in college, so not everybody's kind of the same nerds like maybe you or I, right? So
Hmm.
what we want to try to do is say, hey, bring your interests to crypto, and guess what? There's something for you here. So do you like art? Well, then you need to look at NFTs. You should probably research royalty payments using the blockchain. There are so many cool things that can be done with ticketing, as you mentioned, or perhaps real estate. Maybe you like real estate, but you're interested in understanding how the mortgage process can be improved. As somebody who's going through the process of purchasing a home, I can tell you there's a lot of inefficiency there that could be improved using the blockchain. If you're somebody who likes music, there are versions of tokenized music that you could actually own. There's a famous DJ and fantastic music artist. I think his name is Allow, but it's spelled 3 LAU, I think. He is actually tokenized versions of his own songs and sells them to people who can then earn royalties on his work. So
Hmm.
the potential for blockchain technology far outstrips the value of money. Like total addressable market is like everything. And
Hmm.
so don't get caught down just the money rabbit hole.
Yeah, sure, sure. No, and this is very encouraging, right? See, we hear Tom Brady tokenizing the, I don't know, 600th the football that was used for his um, oh my god, yeah.
His like
So
game winning touchdown,
yeah, the
right? It
game
was,
winning, yeah, the
yeah.
game winning throw. And we have some great music directors tokenizing their songs. But you see, what are the platforms, or how do I get into this, right? So yeah, I do not know how to deal with the smart contracts or various blockchain platforms. For a normal end user, what should I do? I'm an
Yeah,
artist. I'm interested. What should I do now?
yeah, that's a great question. And it's a question I answer a lot on our podcast, TradFi to DeFi. My biggest goal in this space is to help educate and help people understand that. And so, usually, the first thing I tell people is figure out why you're even interested in this in the first place. Find your personal why. There's something in your mind that encouraged you to go down this path. And you've come to this place where you've said, okay, I'm flirting with the idea of crypto. What is my first step? And so, it can be overwhelming. And what I would encourage people to do is don't just treat it like any sort of asset class. Do some digging into your own personal interests and find on Twitter or Discord or Telegram. These are the places where a lot of crypto people congregate. Try to find your crowd. Now, a good place to start is a place like TradFi to DeFi, where we help people kind of understand this and chat with them. And we host community calls and things like that and podcast episodes. And also check out the Tokenized podcast, right? I mean, there's a reason that folks like you and I have a passion for having these conversations. We're trying to educate. Now, for that next step, okay, you found out your why. I would say it's important to, at the bare minimum, get a little bit of Ethereum or Bitcoin and send some to a friend. Although I mentioned, like, you don't have to do just the money context. Currently, most applications are money related, they're lending protocols, or they're maybe NFT projects. Buy a little bit of Ethereum, not investment advice. Do your own research, but get some Ethereum, send it to yourself, figure out how to hold that crypto in your own self custodial wallet. And don't ever invest more than you're willing to lose, right? There's a handful of things that can go wrong when you take your money from a crypto exchange and then pull it into a self custodial wallet, one that you control. You might type in the address wrong, or you might accidentally send more than you intend or not as much as you should. And then there are gas fees. There's a lot of different things that you're going to run into as challenges, which are going to be learning opportunities. When you run into a roadblock, you say, oh, okay, I should ask somebody about this. Usually, that best thing to do is find a friend, find somebody who's got a little bit more experience than you. Reach out to people on LinkedIn, have conversations with them. That's probably the best way to really just get your feet wet. Try some of those things, and then before you know it, you'll start getting into groups of people that are talking about this stuff, maybe more in the fun art context or real estate context. They're out there. I tell you, there's a ton of people out there who can answer your questions.
Mhm. Yeah, that's definitely helpful. And you see, it is not just like individuals getting into this space, right? So we are seeing enterprises getting into this space. For example, BNY has announced their venture into building custody solutions for digital assets. That
Yes.
includes Bitcoin and State Street, Citi. What are all these big players doing here?
Well, there's a lot of money to be made. I
Mhm.
think we should always recognize that the profit motive reigns supreme whenever an institution is looking to explore a new technology. And that's okay because we do want the profit motive to encourage innovation. And so institutions are looking at this space and they're recognizing a handful of things. They're recognizing the payments use case. Stable coins and Bitcoin and crypto networks can be used for settling payment obligations very quickly. If you're trying to send an international wire, you have to send it to a correspondent bank domestically in the US, who then has to then send it to an international entity. Each step along that way could take hours to days, and then there are fees every single time that happens. Well, if you have a wallet and you're in Africa, and I have a wallet and I'm in Paris, I can simply send you some USDC or Ethereum or Bitcoin, and you'll receive it within the next few block confirmations. And so that reality, that is a huge jump in innovation and improvement. And every institution that is worth, that thinks that they want to be around for the next 100 years is studying this technology and realizing they need to get smart on it. So they've recognized the payments use case, but they've also recognized the asset speculation use case, which is that as these networks grow in adoption and usage, naturally, that base token or coin asset associated with a particular network will accrue value as more and more people want access to it. Again, not investment advice, but you should consider that as these networks become popular, the value associated with those networks will go up. And so institutions have recognized that as well.
Wonderful conversation, Taylor. Any closing thoughts? We are nearing the end.
Yeah, no, that went by really quickly. In fact, I think we should definitely do it again. And I would love to have you on the TradFi to DeFi podcast as well. I think that for anyone who's interested in learning more about this, these are the types of conversations you should listen to. Take your time, be safe, do your own research, trust nobody, do your own research, and really take the time to understand this new paradigm because time is short and time is moving quickly. And this paradigm, I think, is really here to stay. So do your research, and that's my own advice.
Excellent. Trust in God, trust in blockchain. Yeah.
Yes. Code, not kings.
Thank you. Thank you, Taylor. Thanks for spending your time with us today.
Absolutely. We'll do it again soon, I hope.
Okay. Perfect. Thanks, Taylor. Very good show. Yeah.
Yeah, that was great. I
Good
didn't
content.
even
Yeah.
I didn't even talk about like my stuff. Like there's more we could even talk about. So that was quick. I can't even believe that was only 30 minutes. That was amazing.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So yeah, no, this is the topic is very close to my heart, and I can see that it's also
Yeah.
yours, and you are a specialist in this, Taylor. Yeah.
Well, it just comes from a lot of mistakes and spending a lot of time with friends. And I
Right.
would love to invite you into the community. It's a Telegram group. Do you have a Telegram handle that I
Yes.
can?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So just send me that on email. I'll
Okay.
add you to the group. And as soon as you have it, let me know and I'll post it in the community and we'll get some traction on it. And
Hmm.
I think what you're doing, the podcast is great. I love that you're focusing on tokenization
Hmm.
because there's a lot of podcasts out there and you're focusing on a very important area. So yeah, man, this was fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. Sure. Thanks, and have a great long weekend. And
Thank you.
yeah, looking forward to meet you soon. We'll keep
You too.
keep in
Yes,
touch.
in
Yeah.
person at some point for sure.
Sure. See ya. Bye.
All right, brother.
Yeah.
Take care.